Beer, as I've discovered, is a grossly misunderstood drink. It is far more complex, an interesting beverage than many of us realize. People who attend Montreal's International Beer Festival, which is now underway at the Palais des Congrès, probably know this. For the rest of us, a talk with Mirella Amato will help. She is a woman on a mission to make us realize the potential of beer. Her book is called Beerology, Everything You Need to Know to Enjoy Beer and Even More. And welcome. Okay, so the first thing I got to say about your book, it's a lot of fun.
Oh,
I mean,
great.
whether you're a beer drinker or not, it's a lot of fun. The history of beer in Canada is really interesting too, because all we know is those standard sort of golden lagers that everybody seems to drink, and there's a reason for that because of prohibition, right?
Right. Well, those golden lagers, I think, are still the dominant style. But for many, many years, it was the only style that we had access to. And what happened, as you mentioned, with prohibition, is that for many years people weren't drinking. And then when prohibition was repealed, that's when all kinds of laws were passed as to, at what age we could drink and where, and starting at what time and what day of the week. And people were very cautious at the idea of drinking again. It was seen as something that was irresponsible and reckless. So the breweries were very much struggling, and in order to survive, they went through a series of consolidations and mergers and just, paring down the number of breweries, paring down the number of brands, keeping it as simple as possible just to be able to survive. And as a result, we ended up with a very flat beer landscape. And for many years, if you ordered a beer, it would necessarily be golden, around 5% alcohol, highly carbonated, with very little bitterness in the finish.
And the myth still remains, right? The stereotype of it being sort of a low class, time to get drunk, time to have a beer kind of thing. You're actually a certified Cicerone certification master. You have Master Cicerone? What is that?
I'm a Master Cicerone, yes.
It's amazing, though. I had no idea. First off, you're the first outside the United States and only sixth in North America, which is incredible. But beer is just so complex. You can pair it with food. You can make cocktails with it. There's just so much there.
Well, people always laugh because at the beginning of my talks I say, I'm a Master Cicerone, and then I say that's a 14-hour exam about beer. And just the notion that someone could sit through that much and that there would be that much information out there. But this book is just the tip of the iceberg, and that's one of my favorite things about beer is how many different aspects you can explore. There's the historical aspect, there's the production aspect, we're talking about prohibition, there are the different flavors to explore, styles. I mean, it's endless, the different ways you can explore beer.
You talk about how beer can be paired, and it's just so much more complex than how I'm going to ask you to simplify it. But there is a certain sort of rule of thumb that you can follow, right?
Yes, well, I have Mirella's rule of thumb, which is something I just realized one day I was doing because I do a lot of beer and food pairing, and there is a detailed explanation in the book. But for someone who's just looking for a quick cheat, what I do is line up the main color of the main ingredient in the dish with the hue of the beer. So white fish or chicken, a golden or light amber beer. Pork or lentils get into a darker amber beer. Then if you're having steak or portobello mushroom, something that's brown, a brown ale. And then maybe with a chocolate cake, a stout. And somehow it just works. The only thing you have to keep in mind is intensity. So, of course, if you're having a really bold food like a stew and you have that with a light lager, you're not really going to taste the beer. And on the flip side, if you have a light salad and you pair that with a 14% alcohol, Russian Imperial Stout with tons of roasted flavors, you're not going to taste your salad. So you want to keep in mind that intensity scale. So I mentioned, for example, with the chicken and a golden beer or a light amber beer. So if that chicken is just steamed, I'll have a lightly flavored golden beer like a Helles. But if that chicken is in a curry of some sort, if it's spicy, a little bit richer, then I might go for a pale ale or even American-style pale ale, a little bit more intense. But rule of thumb, match the color of the main ingredient to your dish to the hue of the beer.
And it's interesting as well because you talk about, I mean, there's so many different kinds of beer, and you say that everything should be tried. But you say, the beers that we drink that we know now are sort of the beers that you sort of ignore, that you just sort of, pop nuts in your... And then there's other beers that you say should be concentrated. You think about it. You actually think about the texture. Another thing that I found so interesting about your book is the whole misconception we have about foam. We think that, oh, I pour beer so well there's no foam. That's wrong, right?
We've all been taught that. I call that the Canadian standard flat pour. And I distinctly remember when I was taught how to pour very carefully so that the beer just lands to the very top of the glass. But the thing is that when brewers are making their beer, they're expecting you to pour it out more vigorously and have that head of foam on there. If you think about it, any ad that you see of beer, there's always a foam on top of the head. You never see that flat pour. And there's two reasons for that. First of all, as the carbonation escapes from the beer, it drags out the aromas, and so you can better appreciate the complexity of the beer. But the other reason, which I find equally compelling, is that if you pour the beer more vigorously, you knock out some of that foam, some of the carbonation into the foam, you have less carbonation left in the beer, and therefore you're consuming less carbonation. And it's interesting to me, I often get comments from people who are, don't drink beer that often, and they'll say, well, I don't drink it that often because it makes me bloated. And my first question to them is always, are you drinking straight out of the bottle, or are you pouring that out and releasing the foam? And more often than not, it really is the fact that they're drinking carbonation that's meant to be knocked out into that glorious foam.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. You're going to have to come. You know what? You're going to have to come back because there's just so much more about beer. Okay, so you'll find out why you shouldn't freeze the glass. The etching is not just decorative. There's a reason for it. There's all kinds of other things. You can do beer tastings. Check out her site. It's fantastic, beerology.ca, which is easy to remember. And she's very kindly brought a book that we will be giving away that she signed. And you can email us at montrealcontest.ctv.ca, and you may be lucky enough to get a copy. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.